The life and sad ending of Bill Monroe. Bill Monroe September 13, 1911, Monroe was born on his family's farm near Rosine, Kentucky, the youngest of 8 children of James Buchanan Buck and Malissa Monroe. His mother and her brother, Pendleton Vandiver, were both musically talented, and Monroe and his family grew up playing and singing at home. Monroe's mother died when he was 10, and his father died 6 years later. By and by his brothers and sisters moved away, leaving Monroe to bounce between uncles and aunts until finally settling in with his disabled uncle Pendleton Vandiver, whom he often accompanied when Vandiver played the fiddle at dances. On that album, Monroe recorded a number of traditional fiddle tunes he had often heard performed by Vandiver. Vandiver has been credited with giving Monroe a repertoire of tunes that sank into Bill's orally trained memory and a sense of rhythm that seeped into his bones. Also significant in Monroe's musical life was Arnold Schultz, an influential fiddler and guitarist who introduced Monroe to the blues. Along with her career, William Smith Monroe, singer, musician, mandolin player, born Rosine, has been married twice and has a son. What I Know About Them. Monroe married Caroline Brown, October 18, 1935, divorced, children, Melissa and James. In the first years of his career, in 1929, Monroe moved to Indiana to work at an oil refinery with his brothers Birch and Charlie, and childhood friend and guitarist William Old Hickory Hardin. Together with a friend Larry Moore, they formed the Monroe Brothers, to play at local dances and house parties. In 1936, RCA Victor signed the Monroe Brothers to a recording contract. They scored an immediate hit single with the gospel song What Would You Give in Exchange for Your Soul, and ultimately recorded 60 tracks for Victor's Bluebird label between 1936 and 1938. After the Monroe Brothers disbanded in 1938, Bill Monroe formed the Kentuckians in Little Rock, Arkansas, but the group only lasted for 3 months. Monroe then left Little Rock for Atlanta, Georgia, to form the first edition of the Bluegrass Boys with singer-guitarist Cleo Davis, fiddler Art Wooten, and bassist Amos Garin. In October 1939, Monroe successfully auditioned for a regular spot on the Grand Ole Opry, impressing Opry founder George D. Hay with his energetic performance of Jimmie Rodgers' Mule Skinner Blues. In 1940 Monroe recorded that song, along with 7 others, at his first solo recording session for RCA Victor. By this time, the Bluegrass Boys consisted of singer-guitarist Clyde Moody, fiddler Tommy McNeese, and bassist Bill Wesbrooks. While the fast tempos and instrumental virtuosity characteristic of bluegrass music are apparent even on these early tracks, Monroe was still experimenting with the sound of his group. He seldom sang lead vocals on his Victor recordings, often preferring to contribute high tenor harmonies as he had in the Monroe Brothers. A 1945 session for Columbia Records featured an accordion, soon dropped from the band. Most importantly, Monroe added banjo player David Stringbean Aikman to the Bluegrass Boys in 1942. Aikman played the instrument in a relatively primitive style and was rarely featured in instrumental solos. Monroe's pre-1946 recordings represent a transitional style between the string band tradition from which he came and the musical innovation to follow. In December 1945, key developments occurred in Monroe's music with the addition of Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs to the Bluegrass Boys. Flatt played a solid rhythm guitar style that would help to set the course for bluegrass timing. Scruggs played the banjo with a distinctive 3-finger picking style that immediately caused a sensation among Opry audiences. Flatt and Scruggs joined a highly accomplished group that included fiddler Howdy Forrester and bassist Joe Forrester, and would soon include fiddler Chubby Wise and bassist Howard Watts, who often performed under the name Cedric Rainwater. In retrospect, this lineup of the Bluegrass Boys has been dubbed the original bluegrass band, as the music finally included all the elements that characterize bluegrass music, including breakneck tempos, sophisticated vocal harmony arrangements, and impressive instrumental proficiency demonstrated in solos or breaks on the mandolin, banjo, and fiddle. By this time, Monroe had acquired the 1923 Gibson F5 model Lloyd Loar mandolin, which became his trademark instrument for the remainder of his career. In 1946 and 1947, the 28 songs recorded by this version of the Bluegrass Boys for Columbia Records soon became classics of the genre, including Toy Heart, Bluegrass Breakdown, Molly and Tenbrooks, Wicked Path of Sin, My Rose of Old Kentucky, Little Cabin Home on the Hill, and Monroe's most famous song Blue Moon of Kentucky. Several gospel-themed numbers are credited to the Bluegrass Quartet, which featured 4-part vocal arrangements accompanied solely by mandolin and guitar, Monroe's usual practice when performing sacred songs. In early 1948, both Flatt and Scruggs left the Monroe Band, quickly forming their own group, the Foggy Mountain Boys. It can also be said to be a major turning point for Bill Monroe later. In 1949, after signing with Decca Records, Monroe entered what has been called the golden age of his career with what many consider the classic high lonesome version of the Bluegrass Boys, featuring the lead vocals and rhythm guitar of Jimmy Martin, the banjo of Rudy Lyle, and fiddlers such as Merle Red Taylor, Charlie Klein, Bobby Hicks, William Hicks, and Vassar Clements. This band recorded a number of bluegrass classics, including My Little Georgia Rose, On and On, Memories of Mother and Dad, and Uncle Pen, as well as instrumentals such as Roanoke, Big Mon, Stony Lonesome, Get Up John, and the mandolin feature Rawhide. By the late 1950s, however, Monroe's commercial fortunes had begun to slip. The rise of rock and roll and the development of the Nashville sound in mainstream country music both represented threats to the viability of bluegrass. While still a mainstay on the Grand Ole Opry, Monroe found diminishing success on the singles charts and struggled to keep his band together in the face of declining demand for live performances. In the early 1960s, Monroe's fortunes began to improve during the American folk music revival. Many college students and other young people were beginning to discover Monroe, associating his style more with traditional folk music than with the country and western genre with which it had previously been identified. During the 1960s, the growing national popularity of Monroe's music was also apparent in the increasingly diverse background of musicians recruited into his band. In 1967, Monroe himself founded an annual bluegrass festival at Bean Blossom in southern Indiana, a park he had purchased in 1951, which routinely attracted a crowd of thousands. A double LP from the festival featuring Monroe, Jimmy Martin, Lester Flatt, and Jim and Jesse was released in 1973. The annual Bill Monroe Bean Blossom Bluegrass Festival is now the world's oldest continuously running annual bluegrass festival. Monroe's compositions during his later period were largely instrumentals, including Jerusalem Ridge, Old Dangerfield, and My Last Days on Earth. He settled into a new role as a musical patriarch who continued to influence younger generations of musicians. In the 1980s, Monroe recorded 2 albums of duets. The first featured collaborations with country stars such as Emmylou Harris, Waylon Jennings, and the Oak Ridge Boys, while the second paired him with other prominent bluegrass musicians. A 1989 live album celebrated his 50th year on the Grand Ole Opry. Monroe also kept a hectic touring schedule. On April 7, 1990, Monroe performed for Farm Aid IV in Indianapolis, Indiana along with Willie Nelson, John Mellencamp, Neil Young, and many other artists. That's what he left of his life story. Monroe's last performance occurred on March 15, 1996. He ended his touring and playing career in April, following a stroke. Monroe died on September 9, 1996, in Springfield, Tennessee, 4 days before his 85th birthday. Thank you for your presence in this world.